Are we ready?
We are ready, David.
Right. I've called this talk Pluto, Death and Transfiguration, which is one of my favourite pieces of music by one of my favourite composers, Richard Strauss. And when I said to Rod that I was going to do the talk, I thought this title summed up very well what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to say something about Pluto. I'm going to then say something about its discoverer and its discovery. Then I'm going to talk about how it got its name. And finally, I'm going to talk about how it got demoted in 2006. My inspiration with a children's book I got out of the local library, this book, A Place for Pluto. I was so impressed with it as a children's book. It actually made me sad because poor little Pluto here has got his bags packed and he's no longer a major planet, he's being demoted to a minor one. And I thought that's given me the idea for the talk. So it's Pluto that I'm going to be talking about. This is my only bit of levity in the whole talk. Charles M. Schultz said, "Don't worry about the world coming to an end today. It's already tomorrow in Australia." And I thought that was quite useful because if Pluto could come down to Earth, you could fit it exactly into Australia. Pluto's got a diameter of 2,370 kilometers and Australia has a diameter of 4,000 kilometers. If you superimpose a map of Europe onto Australia, it doesn't look like it, but in actual fact, if you moved it across slightly to the right, if Pluto would start where Darwin is at the top of Scotland, and the base of Pluto would be at the top of Spain, the northern coast of Spain. So it gives you the idea that Pluto is not exactly a gigantic body. And I was reading today that in fact at one time, astronomers actually did think it was the same size as the Earth. And of course they realized it's a lot smaller. Pluto and its leading moon Charon could be placed on top of North America, as you see there. And finally, if you compare Pluto and Charon against the moon, you'll see that Pluto is a lot smaller than our moon. Right, somebody kindly went up into space and took this picture of the solar system. It's not to scale, obviously. You've got everything there. You've even got one of the asteroids, Ceres is there, a comet very conveniently flying by, and Pluto and Charon, the very tiny little objects on the right-hand side near to the Kuiper belt. Right, somebody also very kindly laid them out on the table like that. And you can see that Pluto, compared to the other planets, is considerably smaller. Right, this is only just so we know what we're on about. Back in the Middle Ages, as I said, there were 7 planets. The moon was regarded as a planet, and so was the sun. So you had the moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and that was it. And then subsequently, over a period of about 150 years, Uranus was discovered in 1781, Neptune in 1846. You'll notice I put a question mark by Urban Le Verrier, because I'm hoping if I do my next talk, I will talk a bit more detail about who actually discovered Neptune, among other things. And in 1930, Pluto was discovered by a man with a lovely name, Clyde Tombaugh. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Clyde Tombaugh. He was born in 1906, died in 1997. Ironically, he was born 100 years exactly before the planet Pluto was declassified and became a minor planet, a dwarf planet, rather than one of the major planets. On the left, you can see him all young and idealistic. There you can see him on the right, wise and whatever. And if you read the bit on the left, it says Pluto was discovered in 1930 by a 23-year-old farm boy with no degree in astronomy. He spent a year comparing photographs of the night sky, searching for a star that changed positions. He would later earn a master's degree and teach at New Mexico State University. There's a picture of him there with one of his many homemade telescopes. That's the Newtonian telescope that he made. And in fact, I could say That's it. That's a summary of my talk. No, it isn't. I'm going to carry on to say a bit more. He is credited with discovering 15 asteroids, as well as a number of other things. I'm sorry about the picture at the bottom. He claimed to have seen UFOs, but he actually on one occasion emphatically denied that UFOs were flying saucers. He thought they were tricks of light, but he did actually think they could be extraterrestrial in origin. Clyde Tombaugh was born in Streator, Illinois, and there's a picture of the main street. By the way, have I been talking for 5 minutes, Rod? I've not timed myself. I know I've only got 25 minutes, so I think I'm all right. Yes, I don't want to go over my time. He ended up at Las Cruces, I hope I pronounced it right, Spanish for the crosses, in New Mexico, USA. There's a picture of it. It looks slightly surreal because it's almost like the town ends and there's a gap and then the mountains start. A very beautiful place to end your days. He also spent some time at a place called Burdett, where there is this sign telling you about him, telling you that he was born in Illinois in 1906. He grew up on a farm northwest of here and was graduated from Burdett High School in 1925. Notice in American, you say and was graduated. In English, you'd say and graduated. You wouldn't say was graduated. During his youth, he explored the heavens with homemade telescopes. Later, he was hired by Lowell Observatory at Flagstaff, Arizona. Vesto Slifer was the director when he was employed there in 1929. And 1 year later, he discovered Pluto. During his planet search, it tells you, he photographed 65% of the sky, spent about 7,000 hours examining about 90 million star images. And besides Pluto, his discoveries included 6 star clusters, 1 cloud of galaxy, 1 comet, and about 775 asteroids. He didn't actually discover 775 asteroids. He observed them. He's credited with actually discovering 15 new asteroids. And it says few astronomers have seen so much of the universe in such minute detail. He actually later on, as we already said, he got his degrees and whatever and taught at the University of Kansas and later at Northern Arizona University. And he ended up as a professor at New Mexico State University. This is some pictures of Lowell Observatory, founded by Percival Lowell, Flagstaff, Indiana. No prizes for recognizing Orion on the left with Sirius in the sky behind the observatory, a beautiful picture taken in the wintertime. You will notice on the right, by the way, back in 1910 or 1920, you didn't turn up for work in jeans and a t-shirt. You dressed formally. And here that some staff are actually posing for a photograph. Here's a picture of Flagstaff Observatory, the telescope today. I'm just going to do a detour now, but it is central to what I'm talking about. Clyde Tombaugh was a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church in America. I'll answer questions about what that church is later on. I'm not going to spend time on it now, but he and his wife helped to found the church in Las Cruces, New Mexico. This church here, very beautiful church, the exterior on the left, the interior in the middle, and the symbol for the Unitarian Universalist Church is shown on the right. I did forget to say, by the way, and I should have done, there's some great names floating around in my talk tonight. Clyde Tombaugh's parents were actually called Moron Dialvo Tombaugh, and his mother was called Adela Pearl Critton Tombaugh. So quite a few quite incredible names in the family. Just one diversion. Oh, sorry. This is a beautiful stained glass window, which is in that church. It shows Clyde Tombaugh on the right. I think he's making a lens for a telescope. There's some children who seem dangerously close to a rocket taking off next to him. There's some more children on the left-hand side. I'm not sure if that's a Native American on the far left. And you've also got the planets of the solar system. And I found yesterday a lovely picture of Clyde Tombaugh and his wife Patricia later in their life posing in front of that beautiful stained glass window. I'm just going to make one diversion. You probably passed it, but Mill Hill Chapel in Leeds City Square is a Unitarian church. And I thought I'd just mention, this is just incidental to the talk, how many people connected with science are Unitarians. Ray Bradbury, my favorite science fiction writer, Charles Darwin, Buckminster Fuller, inventor of the geodesic dome, Sir Isaac Newton, he's the big one, Nobel Prize winning chemist Linus Pauling, Joseph Priestley, discoverer of oxygen, who was the minister at this church in Leeds, Albert Schweitzer, Kurt Vonnegut, and I found out only the other day, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web. When Clyde Tombaugh died, he was cremated and his ashes were put in a small container, which is actually attached to the New Horizons spacecraft, which is now somewhere in deep space. And it says, "Interned herein are remains of American Clyde W. Tombaugh, discoverer of Pluto and the solar system's third zone," that's the Kuiper belt, "Adele and Muron's boy, Patricia's husband, Annette and Alden's father, astronomer, teacher, punster and friend, Clyde W. Tombaugh, 1906 to 1997. And that's a picture that shows you a little bit better. So you could say it's a bit sad, but I also think it's very moving that part of his ashes are now flying off into deep space. Here's the actual picture, 2 photographic plates that were taken on 2 separate days. And if your eyesight's good, you will see on the left-hand side that object that has the arrow pointing at it. And 6 days later, it had moved. And Clyde Tombaugh realized if it's moving, it can't be a star. He discounted being an asteroid, so it must be a planet. And it must be the missing planet that Percival Lowell had set himself the job of finding. Here's the actual apparatus that was used by Clyde Tombaugh. It's called a blink comparator. It was invented by a physicist called Carl Pulfric in 1904. What happens is you look through the eyepiece, there's actually a picture at the bottom of Clyde Tombaugh looking through the eyepiece, and you can blink these 2 pictures on either side, and you can do it fairly quickly. And the objects that don't move, the stars, will be in the same place. And if you find, as I've just shown you, an object that has moved, it is not a star, it must be a planet, okay? It took him up to a week to examine 2 plates. The plates themselves are 14 photographic plates between 14 and 17 inches or 36 by 43 centimeters. And it doesn't make it clear on those pictures at the bottom, but you've got a lot of stars, thousands of stars. So you really need good eyesight and an awful lot of patience. And he had those 2 qualities, which meant that he was able to identify this new object, which was the planet Pluto. And that's 2 aliens. They were a bit more advanced in 1930. They had computers, and they're looking and they're excited that Planet 9 has been discovered in the outer solar system.
And Mr. Man.
Mr. Man. There's also a book, which I haven't read, that he collaborated with Patrick Moore in writing, called Out of the Darkness, the Planet Pluto. I'd love to read it, but I haven't read it. But you can get it on Amazon at a reasonable price. And I can actually remember, even though my memory seems to be fading these days, I can actually remember Clyde Tombaugh appearing on the Sky at Night, being interviewed by Patrick Moore. I think they were great friends. Right, just a few little facts about Pluto. It has a slightly eccentric orbit. Sometimes it's nearer to the sun than Neptune, and the distance from the sun varies from 4.4 billion kilometers at perihelion when it's closest to the sun to 7.4 billion kilometers, which is the aphelion, distant when it's most distant from the sun. So it's normally averaged at about, I think it's 5 point something billion kilometers. The light from the sun takes 5.5 hours to reach Pluto. It has 5 known moons. Charon, discovered as late as 1978. Charon, who's the guy who rows the boat across the river Styx into the underworld. Nix and Hydra. Nix is not named after President Nixon. It's the Greek god of the night. Hydra is a Greek, in Greek mythology, a multi-headed snake. They were discovered as late as 2005. Cerberus in 2011, the multi-headed dog that accompanies Pluto, and the river Styx. Styx was discovered in 2012. I always wondered why Cerberus is spelt there with a K rather than a C. That's the Greek spelling, and the reason it was spelt with a K rather than a C was because there's already, I believe, an asteroid called Cerberus, so they had to distinguish it. Charon and Pluto are sometimes thought of as a binary system. It's a mixture of ice and rock. The surface temperature is between -226 and -240 degrees Celsius. So it's bloody cold. It has, the internet describes it as a tenuous atmosphere, and the atmosphere comprises nitrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide. So the actual atmosphere is actually warmer than the surface. So if you ever go there, you need to fly around and never put your feet down on the surface, otherwise you probably your feet will freeze. And I read recently that Siberia in the winter has a temperature of -90 degrees Celsius, so you think it is cold. The radius, we've already said the diameter, it's 737 miles across, or 1,185 kilometers, so it's smaller than our moon. Right, the discovery of Pluto. Not the discovery, the naming of it. This lady, Venetia Burney, who in 1930 was 11 years old, and she died in 2009. She actually became a maths teacher. Her father was a professor at Oxford University. Her granddad had been a librarian in the Bodleian Library, and her granddad happened to know the professor of astronomy at Oxford University, who in 1930 was called Herbert Hall Turner. She suggested to her granddad, why not call the new planet Pluto? Her grandfather told Herbert Hall Turner. He notified the people in America. Eventually the name was adopted, and as a reward her grandfather gave her £5, which I've been assured is worth about £300 in today's money. Pluto in mythology, there's a picture of Pluto in ancient Greece and there's one in ancient Rome. Maggie, my wife, who's sitting here on my right, says the one in ancient Rome looks like he's had a bad hair day. His hair looked a lot nicer and neater, and his beard on the left. There's his multi-headed dog, which looks like it's got 2 heads, but in Greek mythology, Cerberus actually has 3 heads. Pluto, the cartoon character, people think it's got to do with that. No, it doesn't. Pluto was discovered in March 1930. Pluto, the dog, appeared in a Walt Disney film for the first time in September 1930. So it isn't named after the dog, but I thought I'd show it. I did actually talk to somebody today in Wakefield, and I mentioned it. He said, oh, Pluto's in Popeye. No, that's Bluto in Popeye. Pluto is the dog in the Walt Disney cartoons. There's a picture of Alan Stern from NASA, who I think is showing Venetia Burney the picture of Pluto that has the crater that's named after her on it. there's a picture of it there. And if you look on the top left, just underneath where it says Venera Terra or Voyager Terra, is the Burney crater, which is named after her. And the white area at the bottom, the big area that you can't miss, after the New Horizons mission went past Pluto in 2015, was named the Tombaugh Regio, or region of Pluto. Right. There were more than 1,000 suggested names. Zeus was suggested by Percival Lowell's widow, Constance Lowell. Atlas and Zymel were two other names. The Lowell staff, when they finally got a vote on it, they had a short list of 3 names: Minerva, Cronus, and Pluto. Minerva, there's already something else, I think it's an asteroid called Minerva. Cronus was actually suggested by an astronomer you may have heard of, or you may not have heard of him, called, wonderful name, Thomas Jefferson Jackson C. And he was very unpopular, that particular person, because he criticized Darwin. He criticized Einstein and Einstein's theory of relativity, and he became so unpopular with his fellow scientists that he ended up working on a dock somewhere. You know, he lost all his academic chances and whatever. Pluto, the name, was voted and chosen unanimously, and it suggested that as P and L are the initials of Percival Lowell, that swayed the vote in adopting the name Pluto. So there you are. That's up to date. 9th planet in the solar system until 2006. Notice, by the way, it takes 248 Earth years to go around the sun. So far, it hasn't done one orbit yet since 1930. It's got a long way to go. But that's just a sort of summary of what we've said. Right, so in 2006, people began to express doubts as to whether Pluto should be a planet. I've actually read up today, the doubts actually started long before 1992, but that's when people started to come out and say, you know, it shouldn't really be a planet. In 2005, Eris was discovered, and Eris is 27% more massive than Pluto. So in 2006, Pluto was reclassified as a minor planet or a dwarf planet in the Kuiper Belt by the International Astronomical Union. But there was only 400 people voted, which I think was far less than the total number of people who attended the conference. And some people have criticized that and said, no, it wasn't really a proper, genuine democratic vote. The International Astronomical Union said there were 3 conditions for something to be a planet. The object must be in orbit around the sun. Yes, Pluto does that. It must be massive enough to be rounded by its own gravity. Yes, Pluto does that. And 3, it must have cleared the neighborhood around its orbit. No. So on that 3rd reason, they decided it should no longer be a major planet, but it should be regarded as a minor or a dwarf planet. Interestingly enough, conference in 2006 took place in Prague. Beautiful city if you've never been there. The astronomical clock on the right, the Charles Bridge at the bottom, and at the top on the left is the main town square with the church of, it's called the Church of Our Lady before Tyn, T-Y-N. And in that church you will find the tomb of Tycho Brahe, the astronomer who worked in Prague with a Danish flag flying there at all times. And both Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler both worked and lived in Prague. And as I say, Tycho Brahe, I believe, died there. So it's ironic that the city where those 2 people lived and worked should be the city that actually declassified Pluto from being a major planet. Some person here actually put this on the thing. I, for one, am glad to see Pluto back as a planet. Pluto has been officially reclassified as a planet. No, pal, you got it wrong. It wasn't reclassified as a planet. It was reclassified as a dwarf planet, a minor planet, which is not the same thing at all. Here's the trans-Neptunian objects, TNOs, the objects that are out in the Kuiper belt. Pluto there is on the left, then Eris, some lovely names, one called Make Make, one called Gong Gong. They've got some lovely names. When I looked at this picture originally, I thought Dysnomia was a moon that I hadn't heard of. No, Dysnomia is actually a moon of Eris, okay? I forgot to mention earlier, by the way, because I'm conscious of the time I've got and I don't want to go over my time, that I think it's Styx and Nix will quite comfortably fit into Yorkshire, okay? They are quite small moons. I'm not going to talk about the New Horizons mission. Rod's going to show you some videos after my talk all about it. But it took off in 2006 and it passed Pluto 2015. Interestingly enough, somebody made the comment, had it been after 2006, the person who was behind it, a man called Alan Stern, might not have got permission to actually send that mission up into space. That's Alan Stern. He said that definition reclassifying this planet, the definition stinks for technical reasons. And somebody called David Leyshon, I don't know who he is, says here, here, here. He actually said, if you use that third definition about clearing everything in its path, you would have to reclassify Earth, Mars, Jupiter and Neptune, because sometimes they have other things in their orbit. So, you know, they would fail on that definition. So he also came up with this great quote, Alan Stern, just as a chihuahua is still a dog, these ice dwarfs are still planetary bodies. Patricia Tombaugh, that's her on the wedding day and that's her in old age. She said, it's disappointing in a way and confusing, but I understand that science is not something that just sits there, it goes on. And she mentioned that Clyde had said before he died in 1997, it's there, whatever it is there. So to finish off, does it really make any difference? There's two people sitting at the seaside here and he's saying, I heard today that Pluto's no longer a planet. And she says, I'm a bothered. It's been the 9th planet in our solar system for 75 years. Oh, come on, let's get married. And I'd like to finish off my talk with the immortal words of William Shakespeare. In Romeo and Juliet, he said, what's in the name? That which we call a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening. Thank you.
Good. Can I make one very, very, very tiny point of pedantry?
Yes.
You said Flagstaff is in Indiana.
Yeah.
It was in Arizona last time.
Sorry, that was my mistake. It was on the thing, it said Arizona. It was my mistake. I was talking quickly. I actually last night, funnily enough, nothing to do with the observatory, but last night I actually turned the television on and there's some quite interesting people came from Indiana. The gangster John Dillinger came from Indiana. And the program last night was about Wyatt Earp and it was so interesting. I'm afraid I got hooked. So I'm afraid, Rod, it was nearly midnight before I went out with my telescope and looked at the moon because the program about Wyatt Earp was so interesting. Anyway, thank you, Steve. Yes, I did make a mistake. Sorry about that.
Can I ask a question as well? Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Go on.
It's about the gods, Pluto.
Yes.
Sometimes it's described as the god of wealth, right?
Yes.
And sometimes it's the god of hell.
Yeah.
So do you know why there's this two discrepancy?
No, I haven't heard it was the god of wealth, but you're probably right. But it's definitely the god of the underworld. And it seems to be a pretty miserable existence to always be down in the underworld and, you know, whatever. I'm not sure about it being the god of wealth. I don't know about that, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. It's not something I know. Maybe somebody else might know. I don't know.
Well, you get plutocrats, don't you?
Is it what?
You get plutocrats, perhaps.
Yes. I forgot to say, by the way, I did forget to say, because I was talking fairly quickly that in the same year, 2006, that I must just tell you this, 3 state legislatures in America had a go. The California State Assembly said the demotion of Pluto is a scientific heresy. New Mexico said it'll always be a planet when it's flying over New Mexico. And Illinois also had a go because he was born there. But interestingly enough, in 2006, the American Dialect Society introduced a new word, Plutoed, which means to demote or devalue someone or something. So there were quite a few people who said, sorry, we don't agree with that. We're taking issue with it. And of course, some people just say, well, it's been there all my life, so why the hell should it suddenly change because a committee of people decided to demote it? I think Rod agrees with me. You do, don't you, Rod?
Oh, completely. It's obviously a planet.
Yeah.
The main reason it's a planet is that I spent, not 30 odd years teaching that, but a lot of my teaching career, I always put it in. Nobody objected.
Funny enough, I've been doing exam invigilation over a period of about 11 or 12 years. And about 3 or 4 years ago, it actually came in a GCSE science paper as if it's still a planet, right? So there are obviously some people who think, no, it's still a planet. You know, what's going on here? And at the end of the day, I'm thinking, you know, well, anyway, does it make any difference? Well, you know, I'll still regard it as a planet.
What slightly puzzles me is why it was Pluto that was discovered by Tombaugh in the first place in that region where he was looking, and not one of the other chunks of ice and rock that are actually bigger.
Yes.
I can't really get my head around why, if Pluto is that insignificant because other chunks of rock in that sort of asteroid belt are bigger. We've got the problem of Pluto being demoted because it's actually insignificant compared with all these other minor planetoids, and yet it was that one that was discovered and not the others.
Yes.
I can't quite kind of square that circle personally.
No, it's a difficult one, but the thing is, it's very, very funny that I read somewhere that it's more than likely that somebody had seen Pluto on a photographic plate, but they hadn't either got the eyesight or the whatever to see it and recognize it. But it said it's more than likely that somebody had already seen it, but they just hadn't recognized it or seen that it had moved or whatever. Whereas Clyde Tombaugh obviously did do, and he's the one that gets the credit. But I take your point anyway. Yeah, I think you're quite right.
Well, it wasn't an accidental discovery, was it? It was, in a sense.
They were looking for it.
Yeah, Lowell Observatory was conducting a search for this supposed ninth planet based on perturbations in of the position of Neptune in its orbit.
Correct.
They rapidly realised it couldn't possibly be Pluto because it was too small. But
yes. But it's interesting that I read today, and I didn't have a chance to follow it up, and I can't remember, it was one of the internet sites. It did say that at one time, but it didn't give the evidence to back it up, that astronomers did actually think at one time that Pluto was about the same size as the Earth. You know, they actually thought it was a lot bigger than it was. So they then did estimates, I think, and then the estimates were too small, because when the mission flew past it in 2015, they found out it was very slightly bigger than some of the estimates people had been making about how big it actually was. So it just shows you, you've got to go up into space to check it all out. That's the thing.
Have they actually come across any other theories as to what perturbed Neptune's orbit then? Because I think I have in the back of my mind some memory of there being this sort of reopening of this theory that there is a ninth planet and which just not ever been discovered.
Yeah.
But there was some evidence that he was there, and this was just recent. Or am I thinking of something else?
it comes up every few years, and then somebody knocks it on the head again, and then it resurfaces. I don't think there's any particular evidence really.
So do they know why Neptune is perturbed so much then?
No.
No, I don't know. Yeah.
The latest theory I've come across is that there is a grapefruit-sized black hole out there. If you look there.
Yeah.
You never know. No, David, the inclination of Pluto's orbit out of the ecliptic, is there any reason for that?
I was reading it up today, but I can't remember any of it, Bill, so I can't answer it. Sorry. Can I just mention, by the way, sorry, I don't want to go away from what Bill said, but I found out today that one of the leading astronomers who was at the meeting in 2006 was a man called Mike Brown. And it said, it quotes him as being one of the leading advocates for declassifying Pluto. And he actually wrote a book, and the book is called, just shows you his scientific objectivity. He wrote a book called How I Killed Pluto and Why It Had It Coming, which I thought is a great title for a book. Yeah.
Insignificant lump of rock.
No.
Ignore it.
Would you like to see these two videos, or would you like a cup of tea first?
How long do they last?